So today I want to showcase a sourdough spelt loaf, which represents all those sourdough loaves I make. So now this is where the magic happens. We have a sourdough starter, which replaces our regular yeast if you make a regular bread, but the sourdough starter will leaven your bread. And it's pretty easy to make it at home yourself. You just need some old starter, or just come to the bakery here and get some yourself. You need some water and some flour, and that's it. So you can take any kind of vessel that has a lid, and it doesn't need to be airtight. In fact, you don't want it to be airtight, otherwise the glass might explode. So you take your old starter. Now this one is active, but it doesn't need to be. You can take a flat starter as well, out of the fridge or out of your counter, it doesn't matter. You put just a teeny tiny amount in your new container. And usually if you're baking at home, like for 1 or 2 loaves, you probably have 30 grams of old starter, and you add about 60 to 70 grams of water, and then just give that a vigorous mix so it almost looks like milk. That just spreads all the yeast and the bacteria around. And then you add your flour, and I don't measure my flour anymore. I just feel the mix if it reaches a certain amount of stiffness. And just add flour. Usually you would add the same amount of flour and water. So you mix until you need real muscle power to mix it up. Close up your jar. Make sure you don't seal it airtight, because you want those gases that will be produced in here, you want them to escape too. And it always sucks oxygen from the outside. You just let that sit on your counter for probably 6 to 8 or sometimes 12 hours in the winter, and you're good to go. So it was very important for me to use grain that is grown right around here. I've got some spelt grain here, and whenever I want to bake spelt loaves, I just get my grain from here. It's all fresh. I call it the gold of the future, because having access to resources like this is very important. It's nutritious, it's healthy, and it's delicious. Alrighty, let's mill some grain. One aspect of having really delicious sourdough bread is milling your grain. And you can just get a really affordable mill online. This one was, I think, like $300. And I'm only using a small one as of now. And it works really well. So I'm using this for almost 2 years every day for a lot of grain, and it's just not giving in. So it's gonna get loud now, watch out. And when you pop it open, you've got amazing, beautiful, good smelling, fresh spelt flour. We have 3 simple ingredients. We need some starter, which is water and flour mixed. We need the whole grain and the white flour, and we need the salt and the water. So we start with the water, and I always use water from the store, not the tap water, because sometimes it has too much chemicals. So if you have a reverse osmosis system at home, that's fine, but it needs to be good water, otherwise it might kill that wild yeast in it. So, and we will mix 2 loaves, so we need about 670 grams of water. And you always want to start with the liquids when you mix the bread dough. And then for 2 loaves, we need about 186 grams of starter. I'm just gonna add that here carefully, and then with that little bit that you have left over, you can mix new starter. And I recommend to use a new jar each time you mix new starter. So you would take this leftover and put it in a new jar and feed it with water and flour. And then once you have the water and the starter mix, you want to give it a little bit of a stir, just to spread all those lactic acid bacteria around and the yeast. Alrighty, till it's kind of like a milky liquid. And then we can add our flours. So I've got about half whole spelt flour, and make sure that when you buy it from the store, it says whole grain spelt flour. Only then you've got the whole grain milled up. And the same amount of white flour, and we just mix it up in our KitchenAid, or in your KitchenAid at home. So I've got about 460 grams each of flour. Now don't make a bread without salt. I made it, it tastes horrible. 18 grams of salt here, Just gonna scoop that out. Alrighty, just put it in there. And just start on very low first and let it do its thing. So I think this dough is good enough now. It's not going to be like your regular bread dough where it pulls from the side. You see, it is quite sticky and liquid, but that's just fine because we're going to give it a better shape by doing some other things to it called stretch and fold. So I use one of those plastic scrapers. They're really handy to get that dough out of the bowl in its current state. And I use a container that is a little bit oiled so it doesn't stick to the container, the dough. And then just kind of scrape this out of here and pour it into the bowl. So don't worry about the stickiness of it yet. That's just fine for a sourdough loaf. And we're going to close this up now and let it rest for about 1 hour. So now this dough that we mixed about an hour ago rested in this container. And as you might assume, this is not good to be shaped into a loaf yet because it's way too shaggy yet. So what we do is now called a stretch and fold, just to give the gluten a chance to develop and build a good structure to hold on to the loaf. And one way to keep my hands from sticking is I use water this time. So I'm going to go in there, grab one corner, and just pull it out and wiggle it a little bit and fold it over. And then each time I go into the water, because you see it is sticky, and then do the same thing again, turn it 90 degrees, go a little bit underneath, pull it out, wiggle, 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 and fold it over. And 4 times I'll do that, because then I got every corner. And that's good for now. And we just let this rest for another 30 minutes and do the same thing again. And the second time around, you'll notice that the dough has a much more compact shape already. Get it out, wiggle a little bit, and fold it over to the other side. And then we just let it rest for another half hour and do that 2 more times. And then we let it rest for about 4 to 5 hours and it will rise in this container. So now the spelt dough that we mixed earlier, we let it rise and then we're going to flip this over. At home you probably have like a small bowl and then shape it. And don't try to shake it out of there. You want it to just go in its own pace so we don't rip the gluten structure apart. So give it time to get out of the bowl all by itself. Now there are 2 methods to keep your hands from sticking from the dough. One is to use a lot of water, but I just like to give it a little bit of a flour dribble. And it don't need a lot, but it has to be rice flour. Because rice flour has a good property that it doesn't soak into the dough. So and usually I measure my dough out to about 900 grams. That is just shy of 2 pounds. And then just put it on the side and just continue with the whole dough. And you can feel if the dough is ready to be shaped when it has like a nice poofiness and wiggliness to it. Now 900 grams is exactly what would fit into a regular bread pan like this. You can get those at Dollarama for $4 already. Easy peasy. So now we're just doing a little pre-shape and we just want to tell the loaves in which shape it needs to go. So we're teaching the dough what it wants to become. And then we need to let it rest for about 15 minutes so the gluten can relax and it will give us a chance later to actually shape it. If I would try to shape it right now, it would just resist and it won't go in the shape that I want it to. So now we'll just let this rest for 15 minutes and then we're going into the shaping. So now after we let these loaves rest for about 15 minutes, you see they expanded just a little bit so the gluten is nicely relaxed and we can shape them into the loaf that we want them to be. So now there are different methods that different bakers use and you can use any method you like as long as you get it into a nice loaf shape. It doesn't really matter. So I just fold it in 3 times and then just do a little roll tuck it in, and you see if your hands are clean and not sticky, you're doing it right. Then the dough was ready to be shaped. And then I roll it into rice flour and put it in a Benetton. A Benetton is just a basket that we bakers use. So now you can also use like a stitching method where you like grab the sides and do this one. A little bit of a fancier method, but the end result is always the same. I just tuck in the ends a little bit and roll it into rice flour. And once you practice this about 10,000 times, you're getting really good at shaping. So keep on baking. So now once I'm done shaping all these loaves, and you noticed I'll put them seam up into the basket, so later when I flip them over, they're already on the right side. And I'm going to pop these in the fridge. So sourdough wants to lay in the fridge for at least overnight. So we always say 8 to 48 hours you can have it in the fridge, and then bake it off. Because during the fermentation in the fridge, the proofing phase, it will develop the nice aroma that it has later when it's baked. So if you want to bake a loaf at home and you don't have a stone oven like I do, you have different options. You can use a Dutch oven, one of those round ones. You can use this really nifty ceramic loaf pans with a lid, and they have just the proper size of venting holes in there. And then you would bake your loaf in here for about 20 minutes and then just take the lid off and bake for another 25 minutes. So that's a pretty nifty thing to have at home. Or if you don't want to invest the $150, you can just use any kind of loaf pans. Put the loaf in here and just close it up with another loaf pan on top. Why do we need to close it up? We want to trap that steam inside the Dutch oven or the ceramic loaf pan, so the crust stays nice and soft during the first 20 minutes of baking. And then once we lift that up, we can release the steam and the crust can form really nice and hard. So always bake in a closed contraption. So next thing you need to bake those in my ovens is some kind of sheet. Instead of using parchment paper, I use these silicone mats which are reusable. And even if there's a little bit of flour on here, it doesn't really matter. And then we're going to flip these loaves onto this thing, and I can put 4 on one sheet. And you see here's the seam. Remember we put this upside down in here. I'm just going to flip it over, and then it's on the right side already. And you see these Benettons make a beautiful pattern on here, and I need to put them in a certain way here so they all fit. So if I would bake these in the oven like that, they would expand and just probably tear on the side, which we don't want because we want them to look pretty. So you would need a tool called a lamb, and there are different versions of lambs. You can have one of these wooden ones, quite fancy, with a blade in here, just a razor blade, a regular one, and you can score, and we can just score like a little wheat stalk here on the side. Now these scoring techniques was used when in a community all bakers would share an oven, and they just would score their individual patterns so you would know which loaf you made, so you go home with your own loaf. So now we just use it to actually tell the loaf where to break open so it looks nice and it's not a random pattern. So we can do this, or we can do just a simple 2-line score. Doesn't really matter, whatever you fancy. Or you can use this lamb. It's just like a $4 thing you can buy, and the blade comes out on the side. I like this better because you can go deeper inside the loaf, and you want to have we call it a functional score, pretty deep. Otherwise the loaf doesn't have enough room to expand. These decorative scores don't need to be deeper than like 1 millimeter or 2. We can do even like a nice round score. Like this is the part where you can get creative, and I use it in my bakery to score the different kinds of loaves. So a spelt loaf will always have this pattern, a rye loaf will have a different pattern, just so I can tell them apart easier. And what you can do also, if you don't have a lamb, you can use a really sharp knife at home, or just hold the razor blade in your hand, but be careful, I cut myself many times. I have a pizza peel, and I just scoop them up. Now the good thing about this oven is I don't need to bake them in containers and not without a lid, because the oven is so sealed itself, it will produce the steam and trap it in the oven. Slide it in there and give it about 18 minutes on 230 degrees. So now we bake this bread for about 18 minutes with the closed vents, and we want to give it another 23 to 24 minutes, but we're going to turn the temperature down from 230 to just 200. And you kind of need to adjust your own oven. Some ovens run a little bit hot, so you need to figure that out. And I have little vents here that I can open to release the steam. That would be equivalent to you lifting the lid off your Dutch oven. I'm just going to open this. And you can see the bread rose already. Just going to let all the steam out. Close it up, and now the steam can continuously come out of these vents here to harden the crust on the bread. And let it bake another 24 minutes. Alrighty, so now we bake this for another 24 minutes, and we can just get it out with my pizza peel here. And look at that, amazing. That looks really good, and you can see the different scoring techniques, how they change the loaf, right? Like this one, just let it grow a little bit here, and the deep score here, let it really open up. And even this is a little flatter, you know, it's still an awesome bread and can be enjoyed with some peanut butter and jam, or some salami, or some cheese, whatever you like, or a grilled cheese sandwich. Alrighty, let's put that on a wire rack, because we want to let this cool out from the bottom too. Then we're good. Let's see how this spelt loaf turned out. I let this cool down for a couple of hours. So the general rule is you want to let it cool down about 4 to 5 hours. I know that's a long time once you bake that fresh loaf, but you want it to be inside cooled down too. Because if you cut into it warm, it might just like gum up a little bit. So let it cool down, resist the urge, and let's see how the inside looks. Look at this, perfect. Nice and just the right consistency. And if you eat a whole grain loaf, you don't want to cut it in thick slices. It's not necessary. You get enough nutrition out if you cut it in thin slices, and 1 slice per meal is really sufficient. There's enough protein and carbs and vitamins in there that you need. So this is about the thickness you would cut this whole grain bread.